"Get your hands off that cart." Not a question, not a warning, a command, delivered the way some men deliver commands when they've decided the answer before they've heard a single word. Valentina Cross didn't flinch. She had learned a long time ago that flinching was expensive, not just emotionally, sometimes literally. She set her bag down on the counter, slowly, deliberately, and turned to face the man who had just grabbed the handle of her golf cart in the parking lot of the Hargrove Pines Country Club. His name, she would learn later, was Dwight Pelham, 63 years old, third-generation member of the club. He was wearing a polo shirt the color of a summer squash and the expression of a man who had never once been told he was wrong. "Excuse me?" Valentina said. "This cart belongs to the club." Dwight's chin lifted. "And you?" He looked her up and down the way a man looks at something he can't quite categorize. "Don't look like you belong here." She let the silence stretch. That was another thing she had learned. Silence made men like Dwight Pelham uncomfortable in ways that words never could. "I'll ask you again," he said, louder now, the way some people get louder when they feel their authority slipping. "Who authorized you to take that cart?" The two women behind the welcome desk had gone very still. The young man arranging towels near the entrance had stopped moving entirely. Everybody was watching. Nobody was saying anything. That's the part no one ever wants to talk about. Not Dwight Pelham. The people who watched and said nothing. Valentina Cross was 57 years old. She had grown up in Macon, Georgia, the second of 4 children, in a house where the windows leaked, and her mother worked 2 jobs, and her father drove a delivery truck and told his kids every single night that they were going to be somebody. She had put herself through Howard University on a combination of scholarships, grants, and a weekend job sorting mail at a distribution center. She had gotten her MBA from Wharton at 28. She had spent the next 3 decades building something that most, including, apparently, Dwight Pelham, could not see when they looked at her. She was not, in other words, a woman who needed this man's permission to stand anywhere. But here is the thing nobody explains to you when you are young and building your life and dreaming about what it will mean to finally arrive. Arriving does not protect you from Dwight Pelham. Nothing does. You can have the degrees and the track record and the net worth and the board seats, and some man in a summer squash polo shirt will still look at you in a parking lot and decide in 4 seconds flat that you don't belong. And you will have to decide, right then, with everybody watching, how to survive the next 5 minutes without becoming the headline they want you to be. Valentina picked up her bag, calmly. The way you pick up a bag when you are not afraid, when you have absolutely nothing to prove, when you have made this calculation so many times that it has become something close to muscle memory. "I'd like to speak with the manager," she said. Dwight Pelham smiled. It was not a kind smile. "That makes 2 of us." The manager's name was Bennett Ford. He had been managing Hargrove Pines for 11 years, and in 11 years he had learned to read a room. He walked out from behind his office door and immediately read this one wrong. "Mr. Pelham," he said, extending his hand first. Then to Valentina with slightly less enthusiasm. "Ma'am, what seems to be the issue?" "This woman," Dwight said, "took a club cart without authorization. I'd like to know who she is and what she's doing on the property." Bennett Ford turned to Valentina with the expression of a man who was already writing the apology he'd have to give to one of these 2 people, and had not yet figured out which one. "May I ask your name?" he said. "Valentina Cross." Nothing. No recognition. He was waiting for something more, a member number, a guest pass, a name he could connect to a file. "I'm here for the 11 o'clock, she said. "The 11 o'clock, Bennett repeated slowly, "with the board." The room shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or 2, like the air pressure changed. "I'm sorry," Bennett said carefully. "Which board?" Valentina looked at him with the kind of patience that only comes from having done this before, many times, in many rooms, with many versions of Bennett Ford. "The acquisition committee," she said. "I was told to use a cart from the lot. My assistant confirmed with your front desk on Thursday." Dwight Pelham had gone slightly quiet behind her, not silent. Men like Dwight Pelham are never quite silent, but quieter. "Aye," Bennett blinked. "Miss Cross, aye. Could you give me just 1 moment?" He disappeared back through the door he'd come from. Through the glass panel beside it, Valentina could see him picking up a phone. She did not watch him. She turned instead and looked at the lobby, the polished floors, the trophy cases along the wall, the photographs of members going back decades. Rows and rows of photographs. Almost all of them the same. Dwight Pelham cleared his throat. Valentina did not turn around. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," he said. His voice had changed registers, not apologetic. Men like Dwight rarely get all the way to apologetic in the first 5 minutes. But the certainty was gone. He was filling space now, which is a different thing entirely. "I'm sure it is," Valentina said. She was still looking at the photographs. When Bennett Ford came back through the door, he was a different man. Not literally. Same polo, same parted hair, same 11 years of managing Hargrove Pines written into the lines around his eyes. But the energy coming off him was entirely different. The way a balloon is different after it's been let down. Behind him was a woman Valentina recognized, Ruth Ann Kepler, the club's director of operations, who had emailed Valentina twice in the past week to confirm logistics. Ruth Ann's face, when she saw Valentina standing in the lobby, cycled through several expressions in rapid succession: relief, alarm, and then something that might have been mortification. Miss Cross." Ruth Ann came forward with both hands out. "I am so sorry. I cannot tell you how sorry I am. Your cart should have been waiting for you at the east entrance, not the main lot. We had a miscommunication with the facilities team." And she stopped, looked at Dwight Pelham, looked back at Valentina. "Has there been an incident?" Dwight Pelham opened his mouth. "Mr. Pelham," Ruth Ann said, and there was something in her voice that closed his mouth again. "Intercepted Miss Cross in the parking lot. I didn't know who she was," Dwight said. "That," Valentina said quietly, still not raising her voice, "is exactly the problem. Nobody had a good answer to that. Not Bennett. Not Ruth Ann. Certainly not Dwight Pelham, who had begun the slow, uncomfortable process of recalibrating his understanding of the last 15 minutes. Ruth Ann guided Valentina toward the corridor that led to the east wing, the executive meeting rooms, the ones with a view of the 18th hole, the ones that most members of Hargrove Pines never saw because they weren't invited to what happened in them. At the door, Valentina paused. She turned back once, not to look at Dwight. She looked at the 2 women behind the welcome desk, who had stood there and said nothing. She didn't say anything either. She just looked at them long enough that they would remember it. Then she walked through the door. The acquisition committee had been convening at Hargrove Pines for 3 days. 7 people around an oval table, working through the due diligence on a portfolio of 17 properties across 4 states. One of those properties was Hargrove Pines. That is the part Dwight Pelham did not know when he grabbed the handle of her golf cart. That is the part nobody in that lobby knew, except Ruth Ann, who had spent the last 48 hours hoping very much that today would go smoothly. Valentina Cross was the managing partner of Crossfield Capital Group, a private equity firm headquartered in Atlanta with offices in Chicago, Houston, and New York. They specialized in hospitality and recreational real estate. In 22 years of operation, they had acquired, repositioned, and sold 43 properties. 4 of them had been country clubs. Hargrove Pines was potentially going to be the 5th. The current ownership group, a family trust whose youngest generation had no interest in running a golf club and a great deal of interest in liquidating their holdings, had been in preliminary conversations with Crossfield since February. The committee at the table had spent 3 days reviewing financials, walking the grounds, talking to the staff. Today was the final session, the day they were going to discuss price. Valentina sat down at the head of the table, opened her portfolio, and did not mention what had happened in the lobby. There would be time for that. There was always time for that. But right now there was work to do, and Valentina Cross had never once in her career let Dwight Pelham, by whatever name he was wearing that day, cost her a deal. The committee worked through the morning. Numbers, projections, deferred maintenance schedules, membership trends. Valentina asked the questions she had prepared, and several she had not prepared, because that is the difference between someone who is good at their job and someone who is exceptional at it. the ability to hear something unexpected in a number and follow it somewhere the spreadsheet didn't show. Around noon, one of the committee members, a man named Fletcher Alt, who had grown up in South Carolina and had the handshake of someone who had been practicing it since childhood, leaned back in his chair and said, "Mrs. Cross, I have to say, I didn't expect someone your age to be doing this kind of work." The table went quiet, not the same quiet as the lobby, something more careful. Valentina looked at Fletcher Alt. He was smiling the smile of a man who thought he had just paid a compliment. "Mr. Alt," she said, "I've been doing this work since you were in graduate school. That's not an accident. That's the point." Fletcher Alt's smile did not disappear exactly. It just settled differently on his face, like a picture that had been adjusted on a wall. The rest of the committee, to their credit, kept going. By 2 in the afternoon, they had a number. By 2:30, they had a structure. By 3, they had the outline of something that would take another 60 days to close, but that everyone in the room understood, in the way people understand things before the paperwork makes it official, was going to happen. Valentina Cross was going to own Hargrove Pines Country Club. She was in the East Corridor, waiting for her car, when she heard Dwight Pelham's voice. He was at the welcome desk. She could see him through the archway talking to one of the women who had stood there silent that morning. The woman was nodding. Dwight was gesturing. At some point, he glanced toward the corridor and saw Valentina. His hand stopped moving. She watched him make the calculation. The way you could see it happen in real time, the pieces clicking into place, the acquisition committee, the executive meeting rooms, the woman he had cornered in the parking lot that morning about a golf cart. He walked toward her. She had not moved, Mrs. Cross. His voice was different from this morning. Flatter, like something had been pressed out of it. "I wanted to. I think I may have. There was a misunderstanding earlier, and I want to apologize if Mr. Pelham." She picked up her bag from the bench beside her. There was no misunderstanding. He blinked. "You saw a black woman in a parking lot," she said, "and you decided she didn't belong. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a decision." She looked at him, not with anger, which would have been easier for him to dismiss, but with the very specific exhaustion of a woman who has had this conversation too many times to be surprised by it anymore. "I'd like to think it'll be the last one like it you make, but I've been 57 years old in this country, and I know better." She walked past him toward the front entrance, where her car had pulled up. Behind her, she heard him say, quietly, to no one in particular, or maybe to himself, "I didn't know who she was." She was already at the door. She didn't turn around this time. "That," she said, "is still not the point." The deal closed 63 days later. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, in a conference room in Atlanta, Valentina Cross signed her name at the bottom of 47 pages of documents and became, in the eyes of the law and the market and the state of North Carolina, the majority stakeholder of Hargrove Pines Country Club. She did not post about it. She did not throw a party. She sent a brief email to her team that said, "Done. Good work." And then she went home and made dinner and called her mother in Macon, who asked how her day was, and she said, "Fine, Mama, just fine." 3 weeks later, Bennett Ford received a letter from Crossfield Capital Group's legal team outlining the new ownership structure and the transition timeline. There was a second letter from Valentina personally, laying out her priorities for the property, the deferred maintenance, the staffing review, the membership access policy she wanted to revisit. That last part was not optional. Dwight Pelham received a letter too. It was shorter. It outlined, very specifically, the club's updated code of conduct, the new one, which had been drafted by Crossfield's policy team and which made explicit what the old one had left vague. There was no personal note from Valentina. She had said what she needed to say in that corridor. The letters went out on a Friday. By Monday, she had already moved on to the next property. That is the thing about people who build things. They don't stop to watch what they've built fall into place. They're already looking at what comes next, at the next problem, the next room full of people who are going to have to recalibrate what they thought they knew when they looked at her. There will always be another room. There will always, somewhere, be another Dwight Pelham. But there will also always be this. Valentina Cross, 57 years old, daughter of a mail sorter and a delivery driver, graduate of Howard and Wharton, 22 years in the game. Walking through a door that she now, quite literally, owns. Not because she had to prove anything, because she earned it. Every single day. In rooms where nobody expected her, and parking lots where men in polo shirts told her she didn't belong, and board tables where someone complimented her on still working at her age, and corridors where she said the true thing clearly and then walked away and never looked back. Her father used to say, every single night in that house in Macon with the leaking windows, "You are going to be somebody." He wasn't wrong. He just didn't know the half of it.